When it becomes cheap to have the beautiful, perfect thing, show me the thing with humanity.
I'm Vas Natarajan.
I'm Sara Ittelson.
And this is Very Brief Short Report, affectionately dubbed VBSR. Sara, what is a VBSR?
So a VBSR is actually how we organize our thinking and discussions during our partner meetings. And it's a term that's always made me laugh because it's the phrase itself is neither brief or short, but it is a very brief short report.
Right. And it takes some amount of time to actually explain what VBSR means.
Exactly.
But if you know, you know.
And now our listeners do.
I love VBSR because it is a way to put some vocabulary to the atomic unit of conversation inside of our firm. So we're always dealing with change in a venture firm. And this is a way in which, I think, as you said, we organize our thinking. We try to decompose really complex ideas into their simplest form. And it allows us to have really engaged, cathartic debate. And so I'm so excited to kick this season off with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's we're bringing that VBSR spirit into the podcast. And we're going to talk about the ideas and thinking that is sort of top of mind in the tech industry, and hopefully a reasonably brief, moderately short report every other week.
Let's do it. Let's see. This week we kicked off with our portfolio review, which is a fairly important artifact inside of a venture firm. That's when we go top to bottom across all of our venture funds, and we really introspect, we analyze, we try to understand what's happening at a ground level across our portfolio companies, both the good and the bad. And yeah, I was just writing down some notes for myself during portfolio review. It feels like there are a handful of some interesting common themes that are binding at least the fastest growing, best companies of our latest cohorts, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure. It really brought to light sort of vintages. And I think that the ones that are really excelling sort of in the current vintage have a bit swung back into the largely in-office, co-located, really sort of grinding on the work. And we were talking about a new sense of pride on efficiency, how far they can get with how small of a team has sort of, become part of the ethos as opposed to what was my funding mark or how much cash do I have in the bank. The source of pride is, how big of a business they can build around a really efficient, hard-charging team.
I totally noticed that too. And I love your point about vintages. We are in our 15th venture fund as a firm. We've been in business for almost 42, 43 years. And so knock on wood, we've had a great string of success, and, we're very much standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of what, past partners have done at Accel. But I look at the 15th venture fund, and, this is really the canonical first AI native fund that we're investing in. I mean, every new seed or Series A that we've done is effectively an AI native business. They're incorporating some aspect of a foundation model into their company. And I think to your point, the identity of these companies looks and feels so much different than past vintages. And so I was just reflecting on it for myself. Some things that you touched on, these companies really lionize the idea of ARR per employee. And so how can we do as much as we can for our customers with as minimal headcount as possible? And part of that, or embedded in that, is I think a lot of our best companies are just using AI to build their companies as well. And so we've talked previously about code gen tools and how that really amplifies productivity for engineering teams. We see that on the go-to-market side with these AI SDRs and AI-enabled sales tools that our GTM teams are using. They are unapologetically in person. I think we see this especially, as we all end up running into folks in the commercial real estate space, and it feels like dollar per square foot continues to grow. Folks want to be in person. They want to be live together 5 days a week. And so that's been a big shift, especially from the COVID days. I think just overall, it feels like the energy has really snapped back to San Francisco. 2019, 2020, certainly at the beginning stages of COVID, we saw a large dispersion of entrepreneurial talent across the country, really, to other tech hubs like New York and Seattle and Austin and places like that. But, you know, maybe what is similar to past platform shifts, like the rise of mobile and the rise of cloud, it feels like talent is really recentering here in the Bay Area.
The other thing that was interesting coming out of portfolio review is I think a lot of what you just described is sort of our most recent batch of investments, right, who have sort of been born in this vintage. And a fascinating discussion was sort of vintages prior. You know, I think the discussion fell into a few different buckets of, you know, maybe it's really working, but is there an AI threat? And so we don't want to, you know, get a false sense of security in the business that we've built. And so how do we sort of interrogate the health that exists? Then there's people for whom maybe it wasn't breaking out and the AI opportunity can breathe new life into a team, you know, in terms of being energizing, into a market, in terms of motivating buyers, sort of a new lease on life for a batch of companies where it maybe wasn't breaking out. And I think that watching that sort of that vintage of companies that are having to reevaluate in the face of sort of the AI transformation is really fascinating. And I think it's been largely positive for most, especially that bucket where I think there's sort of a new set of opportunities to go after.
Yeah, I thought one of the most interesting parts of our discussion was just thinking deeply about any incumbent, more classic SaaS company. What data advantage do they have as they are weaving intelligence into their application? We talked about Ironclad as a great example of a company that has built so much of its value proposition really around the workflow of managing contracts between multiple different parties and the efficiency that is gained when you can bind participants in that process into kind of a single canonical tool set. It makes the back and forth around getting to an agreement so much easier. Okay, now what is Ironclad's AI story? Well, Ironclad didn't start out as an AI native business, but here they are sitting on this huge corpus of contract data. And so they know that Accel or, you know, name your customer prefers indemnity clauses in this form, or they prefer, you know, expiration terms in this way, or they're more likely to respond favorably to, you know, this set of legalese as opposed to that set of legalese. And so taking all of the historic edit data that, you know, two counterparties have engaged in to reach an agreement, how do you then use that edit data to more intelligently deliver a contract that, you know, maybe in a canonically zero-shot way, hey, after just one prompt, we can get to an agreement between these two parties and just be on our way and start executing on the business. I mean, that's the sort of transformation that's now possible. Now, the healthy debate we had is, well, which of our portfolio companies actually has that sort of incumbent set of data that they can act upon in an intelligent way? And the companies that don't, how do they start to put themselves in that data path so that they can, you know, they're not just flipping on the OpenAI API, but they're actually, you know, wrapping that API, wrapping that foundation model in some sort of unique context.
I think some of that sort of data as a moat is a little bit being called into question in this moment, because you can now, you know, essentially bring some data slop to a new platform, and it can way more efficiently make sense of it than ever before. And so I think even the folks who have that, you know, data advantage can't be sort of lazy around it, you know, because the portability of that and the comprehension of a new tool to be able to interpret it and make sense of it and produce value on top of it, I think is sort of at its highest. In the same way that we're seeing companies build flexibility across underlying models and they want the best performant piece, the flexibility across data, I think is, you know, has been there, but is even more pronounced and makes that switching cost, I think, a lot lighter. And so I just think some of the things that you maybe previously would be like, oh, this is too hard to dislodge, maybe they're not as secure as they once were.
I think this gets to a broader question that we spent a lot of time debating this week in portfolio review, which is, we're talking about data and its potential to create a moat around a business, but what is the definition of a durable, sustainable, competitive advantage in this era of software development where, the code gen tools have gotten so good, everyone can build whatever piece of software that they need. I think your point about data portability is spot on. And then we're also talking about sort of the incremental value of net new data that an application has. How valuable is that? But how does a company really stand apart in what feels to me like such a competitive era? I mean, I was ruminating on this when I was talking with some founders this morning. The opportunity, if you look at the quotient of our business, the opportunity feels like it's positively inflected. I mean, that curve is going exponential. You can take software and touch so many people around this world. But the denominator associated with that feels like it's also inflecting because it is so hyper competitive out there. And the second we see a company that is scaling really quickly, as any efficient market does, we see capital allocated to a number of competitors that attempt to claw at whatever profits are being generated there, and that manifests in 5 new competitors that have all raised hundreds of millions of dollars of VC, and suddenly we're all just sort of fighting this feature war and this data war. And so for us as a team, as we're investing, what are the preconditions we really need to solve for? I mean, what does durability really mean in this generation?
I think it's particularly hard because so many talented people are seeing this as the right moment to found.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, it is, in that example you gave, there's an opportunity, a bunch of other companies are going to get funded. That maybe would have sort of, matriculated over the next, 18 months. And it feels like it's in the next 3, because there are capable, talented people that want to be building in this moment. And that's what's so exciting, but it also makes it harder to feel like this is super unique, and to distill from that pack, the one that you think will endure.
I think exactly to your point, whereas, in prior technology shifts, you had a smaller N number of companies that could then attract a deeper bench of talent to their businesses. That talent has now been sort of peanut buttered more horizontally across many, many more companies, partially because more founders are self-identifying in this moment that they want to go out and start a company. And so, for us as seed and Series A investors, we are largely betting on people. And I would say day in and day out, we are meeting incredible people starting companies. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are all going to build, venture scale outcomes. And so that's the sorting problem, I think, that you're alluding to, that we really have to parse out for ourselves.
Totally. Yeah, I think I find myself being drawn to, trying to unpack like the real network effects. Is this something that can compound as it gets bigger? Does it get better? Does it get worse? I personally, my whole career, I've largely worked in companies where there was this intersection of the technology and things in the real world. And I think that messiness and murkiness is just hard, and I find myself being drawn to those businesses because it's not something that you can just, turn on overnight and kind of have the same, there's greater activation energy required to get the real world bits to align. And if you can work through that hard activation energy and build something of worth, I think that's sort of an exciting space. So I think
it's really defensible because it's hard to find, entrepreneurs who can express themselves in the bits of the software, but then can also go out and organize the atoms of the economy or the marketplace that you're talking about. I mean, those are two different very sides of the equation that one has to collapse into one. The pendulum feels like it's swinging, or maybe it's always been here, and I felt it swinging or oscillating back and forth over the last couple of years. But to orient your thinking not around building a product outward, but more so solving a customer problem and then working inward. Understanding the very nuanced psychology of your end user. What do they gravitate towards? How do you build something that's so delightfully ergonomic that they want to live in your product day in and day out, that they're willing to wrap some habit around your service? How do you put a brand around that? How do you inject taste into that that's exciting and motivating? It feels like the best companies of this generation are spiking on those dimensions of, like, I don't know, it's almost like liberal arts excellence as opposed to science and technology excellence. Don't get me wrong, you still need to know how to build a great product, engineer it, scale it, and deliver an end service. But the abstractions have gotten so good now.
Yeah.
Between the APIs from the foundation models, between the SDKs and the APIs from the cloud infrastructure providers, the payments providers. I mean, you are really fastening together a composite of existing code. But then what is your secret sauce? It's that brand, it's that look, it's that feel around the product that is able to invoke some sort of emotional response in an end user. That's what takes you the last mile. And that's what I observe, I think you observe as well, the best companies of this generation, the best products, the Notions, the Cursors, the Gammas, the Granolas, products that we're all using on a day in and day out basis. They found a way to really make that last mile of experience click and shine. And working backwards, we are trying to find that level of thinking with the founders that we hope to back.
I do feel like there is a difference between if you're trying to really break new ground versus make something that is just, utilitarian. And I think that these platforms will have to either sort of know the job to be done or thread the needle on how much do I just want to go to what is the sort of mainstream way of solving this problem versus when do I want to infuse some ingenuity, like you almost think of, sometimes I think about personalization. I'm like, actually, in some context, I want this sizzle.
Sure.
Show me I want to see, this shopping site, not just everything in my size, everything in my whatever, but show me what's trending. What are people looking at? What are people doing? That there's a novelty factor that I think is exciting. And so, and sometimes, and we'll probably, we'll talk about some of these vibe coding tools. You see kind of, it's like, here's the ripoff of Spotify. Here's the ripoff of, ChatGPT. And it's kind of underwhelming. You're like, I don't want to just rip something off. I want to make something new. But I also want to learn from sort of the earned lessons of how you create a beautiful user experience. And so I do think folks who are most successful will find the way to find that right
blend
weaving,
those two things,
because I think, we were talking about Gamma. If every presentation looks the same, you lose the impact of the presentation.
Right.
And so it can't just be that it sort of defaults to the most, base, form. And so what is the right sprinkling? How do you inspire? How do you create something net new while also learning from successes? I think it's easier said than done, but I think that people that engage in that hard task will hopefully come up with something that's much more productive and inspiring and truly a platform where the next generation gets built.
I totally agree. No, I think that's really insightful. So, Sara, what is vibe coding? I couldn't help but peek over your shoulder earlier today. I saw you coding away, vibing it out. You were building some sort of app around, I don't know, themes for kids' parties or, I don't know, things to do, activities over the weekend. But a lot of folks are throwing this concept out, but I don't know, put some definition to it.
Andre Karpathy gets credit for the term, a tweet that he authored that was kind of capturing this essence of being able to build sort of less in this very technical structured way, but more, I wanted to do more of this and I wanted to do more of that. That sort of vibey sense, right? And with these new tools, it's very possible to say, kind of at a higher level, very casually, I wanted to do that, now do this.
Was it an app that was iterating through, I don't know, different kids' activities and, seemed like you were plugging into the Amazon store and
Yeah.
I don't know, things on Yelp that
Yeah.
sort of manifest a theme
Yeah.
like a zoo day or a sailing day
Exactly.
or something like that.
Exactly. I was using V0, shout out to Portfolio
cool. Shout out.
Company for sell. And it was really fun.
Yeah.
Really fun. To have a concept and to be able to say, I want it to be able to do this, and I want it to be able to have these component parts. And, the examples you're giving are perfect examples of things that would take a ton of time to say, okay, now I want you to integrate into Amazon. I want you to integrate into Spotify. I want you to integrate into Instacart. And I was having it come up with these sort of themed events that hit all those services as sort of a bundle, and it was so fun. But also challenging, where sometimes I'd update something and it would break something that I'd previously done, and I'm debugging it. I tapped our fellow partner Casey and pulled her over in a couple instances, but the ability to have an idea and actually bring it to life, being so accessible. If I wanted to go the distance with this concept and actually bring in a team, get some designers, it'd be so much easier to impart the vision with this very, feature, highly capable, though not the prettiest thing, but highly capable.
They look pretty well
prototype.
designed.
It's pretty good. It's
Yeah.
pretty good out the gate, actually. I think that's what's so exciting in this moment. And you know this, but for our listeners, I'm not technical. A lot of our team is. And so for me to be able to be doing that is just incredibly fun. But it sort of speaks to the opportunity for anyone to build in this moment.
You're touching on so many things that I love thinking about, Sarah. That's why I love you as a partner. We have a long history of investing in creator tools businesses. So you think back to Squarespace in the website building era, more recently Webflow, which is a combination of website building, but also this sort of platform architecture to build higher level, more complex web services. Vercel, V0, Frame.io, Gamma. The idea of creating abstractions that allow you to take an idea and spread them across the world. I mean, that to me is the engine of society. That's the engine of progress. If we can get ideas out there and allow the traditional forces of a laissez-faire marketplace to sort of highlight the best of those ideas and bring them to the forefront. I mean, that historically has just been the engine of society. That's how we progress as a species. And the cool thing about this moment is these tools are now enabling, non-technical-ish, semi-technical people to bring these ideas to life. And that's addicting. And maybe just connecting that to a comment that we were making earlier, I think there's a core psychological need that these tools are tapping. In some ways, I find vibe coding, the phrase, to be a little, not pejorative, but like overly reductionist. Because actually, I view these as the future of expression on the web is to build a website, to build a piece of personal software that fits some need for you, and to be able to do that in this era. It strikes like a deeply emotive, creative chord in all of us. And I think what we're seeing is this new, quite frankly, consumer phenomenon around these coding platforms where, again, non-technical people are coming to the forefront, and they're able to create something that they can then share with their friends and family.
Totally.
I was talking to, my nephew is a subscriber to one of these tools, and it's fascinating hearing just the zeitgeist among his cohort of fellow 13-year-olds, 8th grade, middle school. The social currency for how they relate to one another it's not how many likes and favorites they have on Instagram. It's what have they built how big is their Discord server, how many people are playing their Roblox games, what is their status on Fortnite. You know, like it's the things that you have done, not necessarily the popularity of the things that you've shared. And that is a very cool dynamic.
Yeah.
That gives me a lot of hope and belief in our next generation. We grew up in the social era.
Right.
We grew up in the era of what did I share and how popular was it?
Right.
We're flipping to an era now of what have you done?
Right.
And how compelling has it been?
Right.
And the tools and services beneath that phenomenon, I think are going to be really, really valuable. And they're going to touch so many more people than traditional website building touched.
Completely. It's sort of this, well, we've talked before about how it creates this dynamic where typically the build versus buy decision was sort of an enterprise thing. Am I going to build this in-house or am I going to buy it? And it produces this build v buy in the consumer space that hasn't existed before. Absolutely. Of like, I can just create my own little app that does it just the way I like it, and that can be mine. And I think that's super interesting and probably great for society.
Sara, how are you finding this era of code gen flattening the development of that first version, that alpha version of your product, of your service? Because it is so accessible, because that ecosystem is flattened so aggressively, what does that imply about how you're evaluating founders, looking for founders, like maybe connecting the concepts of the things that we were talking about before around what is it going to take to be a sustainable, durable business in this era of competition? But similarly, if everyone does have access to these software building tools at their fingertips, you know, what are you looking for now as you think about the next seed or Series A that you want to lead?
I think it puts pressure on the perennial topic of team.
Yeah.
Because I think you do have to assume, you have to assume that there are a bunch of talented teams and we're picking someone who's like special in a way that hopefully is suited to the problem space that they're going after. We were chatting about a little bit before, like maybe that is a distribution advantage. Maybe that is some sort of style essence around the problem. But I think you really want to understand the team. I think it's changed and you could speak even better to this sort of predating my joining venture, but I think there was a time when a really slick demo would really turn heads. Yeah. And I think that probably the bar for what is considered a slick demo has really moved. Yeah. And sometimes people come in with stuff and we're like, when did you get started? Yeah. You know, like 3 weeks ago, like this thing's like pretty, you know.
Well, there was a sorting mechanism to the demo. You know, our founders, Arthur and Jim, will always tell the stories of, you know, back in the 80s and 90s when folks were coming in with application software demos, they were lugging in their servers and their big sort of classic monitors into the office when we were down in Palo Alto. And for Arthur and Jim, it was a bit of a litmus test of, well, could you actually source the hardware to build the demo on? And then could you get the demo to work live in person in that office? And that was that was very clarifying for them. That was they could sort through their top of funnel just by virtue of seeing who could pass that first test.
Interesting.
And now I think to your point, you know, it's sort of a default assumption that you can build a really great piece of software out of the gate. And so, now we have to go to this next layer of the intangibles to really figure out, okay, well, what are the things that are going to make sense for Accel and vice versa? What are the things that, you know, are going to make sense for the founder vis-a-vis what we can bring to the table?
Yeah.
If you imagine AI as this nuclear warhead that just flattens the curve to creativity. And it makes everyone, on a scale of 1 to 10, everyone suddenly out of the gate can be a level 7, level 8 creator. Well, in effect, it really, part and parcel with that enablement comes, I have to think, a radical commoditization of unique creativity, of a unique piece of content, of a unique piece of music. And I was reflecting on this actually over this weekend. We got, my wife and I have been married for almost 5 years now. We as part of our wedding gift, we got a gift certificate to Heath Ceramics. So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know what Heath Ceramics is, if you're in San Francisco, you absolutely know what Heath Ceramics is. This is a high-end, very human-in-the-loop pottery shop that creates really high-quality plateware, dinnerware, etc. And as my wife was perusing through this list of stuff, I'm an IKEA guy. I'm a crate and barrel guy. I get a plate, $5.99. I put it in the dishwasher. I eat my meal. I'm good.
Yeah.
These plates are, handcrafted, and they have little subtle imperfections that remind you of the humanity of the creator behind that plate. And Heath is able to charge 10x for that dinner plate that I pay for the mass-produced plate. And so the analogy I'm trying to draw here is and shout out to anyone who loves IKEA, what AI is doing to creativity is what IKEA did to, housewares. And yet there is still a sliver of the market that still really, really demands and craves and is willing to pay a premium price for the things that remind you of the human creator behind them. And so what that has led me to think about is just as AI flattens all these categories of content, are the returns to human-generated things, or the returns to live experiences like concerts, really high-quality restaurant experiences, the things that still anchor us in humanity. I wonder if the price points on that are going to continue to inflect in the way that Heath is able to charge a premium price for that plateware, while the price points for everything else kind of start to fall. And, how do we play that as a venture firm? I mean, we're an early investor in a company called SeatGeek, which is, one of the largest ticketing marketplaces out there.
Totally.
And they sort of benefit from this. They are an index on these really unique live experiences that AI can't recreate.
Yeah.
And if more of the economics continue to accrue to those premium price products, those products that are anchored in humanity, ideally or effectively, the equity value is going to follow that as well. And so, I've just been thinking about how we play that as a team.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's because I'm an optimist, but I do hope and expect that there will be this sort of swing back to sort of human connection. And I do think you see this, and in some places it's, there's a ton of revival around, health and wellness as like social clubs, right? As like a community. In some places, taking the role that maybe a community center or a church or something, might play in a community. And you do see these as sort of reaction, like recoils from we're getting too disconnected. How do we come back together? Even TikTok as a response to Instagram, right?
Sure.
When it became cheap to have a perfect picture, you didn't want the perfect picture anymore, right? You wanted the raw, authentic picture. Right. And I think that's kind of your, when it becomes cheap to have the beautiful, perfect thing, show me the thing with humanity,
right.
And that's the Heath with the, if you really want to see the humanity, here's the tip. Go to Sausalito, and they've got the seconds, and the seconds have like minor imperfections, like a little bubble, and they're like half price, and it's beautiful.
Totally.
And you get that extra humanity and a discount.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's very meta, Sarah. That's very, very meta.
Now he's going to hear this. I'm going to bump up the price of the seconds. Extra humanity.
Totally. No, it is. It's fascinating. I mean, a lot of the things that we're talking about right now are just like the things we value as a society. All of that is reorganizing real time, I think. And I'm even feeling this in the things that I pay for and don't pay for, and the way in which I've reallocated my time and attention from certain digital services over to new digital services. And I think that's what makes our job so interesting is we live in the chaotic change, and it's an honor, and it's it's a great blessing to be able to experience that and parse through that change with you. And using VBSR as maybe to bring it back home, using the concept of the VBSR for us as a partnership of just how do we parse through all of that entropy and how do we make great decisions as a firm. And that's something that throughout the season, we just want our listeners to be able to have a window into our thought process of what are we thinking about on a week-to-week basis? Who are we as people? What keeps us up at night? What are the big existential dramas that we know are looming, but we're just starting to intellectually grapple with? For me, it's fun to just participate in that process. There's one of my favorite podcasters. He started this podcast called Founders, and he just does founder deep dives. And it's funny, on a recent podcast, he actually mentioned that he wanted to call his podcast autotelic. And I was wondering, I've heard that word before, but what does autotelic mean? Fortunately, he defined it on the podcast, but autotelic means it's the pursuit or it's the engagement of the act purely for the sake of the act, not for some intended outcome or benefit or initiative. There's no sort of stamp at the end of it all. And to me, this is a very autotelic process. We love as a partnership just sitting around the table and debating these things, and it's just the act of engaging with that substance, with that change. That's what gets me up in the morning, and that's why I find our job so fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a front row seat, and that seat is alongside just such talented, creative builders, problem solvers, and so feel incredibly, incredibly lucky for sure.
With that, we're going to wrap episode 1, season 1 of Very Brief Short Report. And throughout the season, we just want to bring our audience along on our autotelic process of just engaging in the substance of this debate and how fun that is. And through it all, we hope that folks develop a deeper understanding of how our firm works, the things that we're thinking about, and put some structure to all the chaos that we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis.
Just a very brief, short structure.
Very brief.
Very brief.
Short report.
Short report.